If a beautiful woman suddenly throws herself at someone, it's best not to let their guard down, because behind that sweet smile could be a deadly trap. She could secretly slip sleeping pills into a drink, wait until the victim loses consciousness, and then push them straight off the edge of a high-rise building. This way, she can make the death look like an accidental fall and carry out the perfect murder. That day, the famous detective Kagoro took his daughter Ran and Conan to Izu to take part in a detective mystery event on behalf of Dr. Agasa. The organizer of the event would disguise himself as the Night Baron and mingle among the participants. Anyone who could figure out his true identity would win a generous prize. The Night Baron was a mysterious villain created by a world-famous mystery novelist. In the novels, he always wore a mask, a top hat, and a cape, and his whereabouts were impossible to predict. He was a mysterious phantom thief who prowled through the night and was even capable of taking people's lives. And this mystery event was built around the identity of the Night Baron. Naturally, Kagoro was more than happy to participate after learning that there was a grand prize. The moment they put down their luggage, Conan began studying the clues left behind by the organizer. However, while he was briefly lost in thought, danger was already creeping closer. Suddenly, a masked man appeared and pushed Conan off the balcony. Luckily, the swimming pool below saved Conan's life. Conan immediately ran back to the balcony, but the figure had already vanished without a trace. Only after regaining his composure did Conan realize that the person who had attacked him was dressed exactly like the Night Baron. He immediately called Dr. Agasa, asking him about the identity of the organizer, and why the man would disguise himself as the Night Baron. However, Agasa knew nothing about it either. The only thing he knew was that the prize for the competition was also called the Night Baron. It was a mysterious computer virus with devastating power, and because of its mysterious nature and similarities to the Night Baron, people had given the virus the same code name. Now Conan was even more confused. He couldn't understand why the man had attacked him before the event had even begun. Just then, Ran came looking for him. When she saw Conan completely soaked, she immediately asked what had happened. Conan didn't want to worry Ran, so he simply told her that he had accidentally tripped and fallen into the pool. Meanwhile, Kagoro had already hit it off with the other participants. They were a young couple, Satoshi and Akiko, a lecherous software engineer named Tokio, a domineering and beautiful president of a software company named Hideko, and a bank employee named Shiro, who had been quietly hiding in a corner by himself. The final participant was an elderly man named Kanagi. Conan was convinced that the Night Baron who had pushed him off the building was hiding among them, but before he could sort out the clues, new trouble came one after another. Satoshi suddenly started flirting with Ran behind his girlfriend's back. Seeing that things were getting suspicious, Conan quickly stepped between the two of them. Conan stared out at the pitch-black sea and described how dark and terrifying the ocean looked at night. Meanwhile, the beautiful company president Hideko actually approached Kagoro on her own and begged him to find out the true identity of the Night Baron. Kagoro initially wanted to turn her down, but he was quickly captivated by her charm, and at the moment he let his guard down, Hideko secretly slipped a sleeping pill into his glass. Completely unaware of what had happened, Kagoro unknowingly drank the drugged wine. Before long, it was 10 o'clock at night. Suddenly, the crowd in the plaza noticed what looked like a figure standing on the roof. It was the Night Baron. With an almost ritualistic flourish, he leaped from the high-rise building, only to meet a tragic end the very next second. His body slammed directly into the statue below, killing him instantly. The police soon arrived at the scene, and Officer Sango took charge of the case. Conan secretly removed the victim's mask and discovered that the person underneath was none other than Tokio, one of the participants. A suspicion immediately arose in Conan's mind. Could he have been the Night Baron who attacked him? Everyone soon arrived at Tokio's room, room 2101. Kagoro was about to open the door when he discovered that a security chain was fastened from inside. The police had no choice but to use a power saw to cut through the chain. The moment they entered, they found Tokio's clothes thrown on the floor, with his key card lying nearby. This suggested that it was a locked room murder. The room's window was also wide open, and directly below was the statue where Tokio had fallen to his death. It seemed that Tokio had fallen from this very window. Kagoro only glanced outside before immediately declaring that it was an accident. He believed Tokio had been trying to imitate the Night Baron by jumping from the balcony toward the neighboring floor to scare people, but had accidentally fallen to his death, and the glove hanging from the outside of the railing seemed to prove his theory. However, Conan immediately rejected this conclusion. He didn't believe anyone would take such a risk just to scare someone. More importantly, The key card was still inside the room. Even if Tokio really had jumped toward the neighboring floor to scare someone, he should have taken the key card with him so he could get back into his room. Conan's words instantly infuriated Kagoro, and he punched him hard on the head. At that very moment, Conan accidentally dropped his pen from the balcony. The group returned to the crime scene to examine the victim's body once again. Kagoro still insisted that it was an accidental fall, and the police were ready to close the case without further investigation. However, Conan made a new discovery. He noticed that the victim's tie had been fastened backward. The only possible explanation was that someone had changed his clothes before he was thrown from the building. In other words, Tokio had not fallen to his death by accident. Someone had pushed him off the building and staged the scene to make it look like an accidental fall. But there was still one major problem. The security chain on Tokio's door had been fastened from the inside, and his key card had also been left inside the room. So after committing the murder, how had the killer managed to escape? At that moment, Conan already had a vague suspicion. The person who had pushed him off the balcony while disguised as the Night Baron was very likely the same person who had murdered Tokio. Conan soon returned to Tokio's room once again. There, he happened to overhear the police mention that they had found traces of tape still attached to the sawed-off security chain. Suddenly, Conan had a flash of inspiration. The killer's method was actually surprisingly simple. All he had to do was attach a long strip of tape to the security chain's latch. After closing the door, he could stand outside and give the tape a gentle pull, causing the security chain to automatically latch into place. Then, with one hard tug, he could pull the tape back out. That way, no evidence would be left behind at the scene. The mystery of how the killer escaped from the locked room was finally solved. Now, all they had to do was determine everyone's whereabouts, and the true Night Baron would have nowhere left to hide. However, there was an unexpected problem. After a series of interrogations, Kagoro discovered that everyone had an alibi. At the time of the murder, the elderly Kanagi had been eating in the restaurant, and a waiter could confirm it. The beautiful company president Hideko claimed that she had been drinking with Kagoro the entire time. However, she had drugged Kagoro and knocked him unconscious, so her testimony was naturally questionable. Although Akiko had been alone in her room, she had used the telephone in her room to call the front desk during the time of the murder. That also established her alibi. The only suspicious people left were the karate champion Satoshi and the bank employee Shiro. There were still obvious gaps in their testimonies, so they needed to be investigated further. Afterward, everyone returned to their rooms to await the results. Ran and Akiko took the same elevator, but the moment the elevator doors opened, something bizarre happened. The Night Baron was standing right in front of them with a smile, as if he were mocking the police for their incompetence. Rand immediately attacked the Night Baron, but he effortlessly dodged her attack. Rand couldn't land a single hit. Conan was about to chase after him with Rand, but Rand suddenly froze in place, as if she had realized something. The group soon reported what had happened to the police, but unexpectedly, another police officer was attacked as well. The officer had been assigned to guard the victim's body, but someone suddenly knocked him unconscious. Even more shocking, the Night Baron's costume had disappeared along with him. What made the situation even more surprising was that this police officer was also an expert in karate. Only then did Conan realize that anyone capable of dodging Rand's attack and easily knocking out a police officer had to be a highly skilled fighter, and the only person at the scene who fit that description was Akiko's boyfriend, the karate champion Satoshi. But there was one question: why would he show himself again after already committing the murder? Could there be another reason behind his appearance? Meanwhile, Rand had also reached the same conclusion. The moment the Night Baron dodged her attack, she had already begun to suspect that the Night Baron was actually Satoshi in disguise. Although she didn't want to believe it, the evidence was right in front of her. Soon, Kagoro reached the same conclusion. After gathering everyone together, he began presenting his theory. Kagoro's conclusion was exactly the same as Conan's. The only person capable of easily knocking out the police officer and effortlessly dodging Rand's attack was the karate champion Satoshi. However, the moment he finished speaking, Rand appeared at the scene with two girls. It turned out that the two girls were Satoshi's witnesses. At the time of the murder, they had been asking Satoshi for his autograph, so there was no way Satoshi could have been the killer. Meanwhile, Conan was examining the crime scene when he suddenly noticed a broken pen. It was the same pen he had accidentally dropped earlier while investigating the victim's room. But this raised a question: if both the victim and the pen had fallen from the same room, why had the body landed right on the statue, while the pen had fallen so far away? Conan couldn't figure it out. Just then, A female waitress offered a reasonable explanation. She explained that because of the hotel's unusual location, strong winds blew through the area every summer, and the higher the floor, the stronger the wind became. Hearing this, Conan finally understood. This was the killer's method. Conan immediately used a tranquilizer dart to knock Kagoro unconscious, and then borrowed his identity to reveal the truth. The killer wasn't Satoshi, but that didn't mean he had nothing to do with the case. Conan lifted Kagoro's arm and pointed toward the hotel building. Several caped blankets could be seen slowly falling from the sky before landing right at everyone's feet. It turned out that Conan had arranged this experiment to recreate the fall. He had the police throw blankets out of different rooms to simulate the victim falling from the building. The results shocked everyone. The blanket dropped from room 2101, where Tokio had supposedly lived. Couldn't possibly land anywhere near the statue. Instead, it landed far away from it, and the reason for this was the strong wind. This meant that Tokio had never fallen from his own room. The killer had turned Tokio's room into a locked room crime scene simply to mislead the police into believing that it was where the murder had taken place. Now, all they had to do was check the room number marked on the blanket that landed on the statue, and the entire truth would be revealed. Sango discovered that the blanket on the statue was marked with room 1091, and that was the room shared by Satoshi and Akiko. Sango immediately identified Satoshi as the killer, but Conan disagreed. The killer wasn't Satoshi, it was Akiko, who claimed that she had been making a phone call in her room throughout the time of the murder. She had killed Tokio in her own room, changed his clothes, then pushed him off the building. Afterward, she immediately called the front desk, trying to use the phone call as proof that she had remained in her room the entire time. Hearing this, Satoshi completely lost control of his emotions. He publicly declared that he was the killer. He claimed that he had pushed Tokio off the building, and that he had also disguised himself as the Night Baron at the elevator. But Conan had already seen through Satoshi's intentions. He was doing this because he wanted to take the blame for his girlfriend Akiko. It was indeed Satoshi who had attacked the police officer and taken the Night Baron's costume. But that was all part of his plan to protect Akiko. Satoshi must have discovered the Night Baron costume in Akiko's luggage, which allowed him to realize what she was planning. To protect her, Satoshi took the risk of attacking the police, put on the Night Baron's costume, and deliberately let everyone see him, so that the police would shift their suspicion away from Akiko. That was also why he had deliberately hidden his alibi during the interrogation. The moment Conan finished speaking, Akiko suddenly let out a cold laugh. She mocked Satoshi for interfering unnecessarily and openly admitted that if he hadn't gotten involved, her plan would have been absolutely flawless. She then calmly confessed to the murder, and she had done it for revenge. 3 years earlier, Akiko's older brother had owned a software company, but the program he had worked desperately hard to develop was stolen by Tokio through despicable means. Eventually, driven to despair, her brother jumped from a building and took his own life. From that moment on, Akiko swore that she would make Tokio pay, so she carefully planned the entire detective event. Using the generous prize money as bait to lure Tokio there, she then invited the lecherous Tokio to her room, and secretly slipped sleeping pills into his drink while he was completely off guard. Finally, once Tokio had fallen unconscious, she pushed him from the high-rise building, making him die in exactly the same way as her brother and completing her revenge. Akiko explained that she had never expected Kagoro to become involved in the case. She had deliberately pushed Conan into the swimming pool at the beginning, hoping to force him to leave as soon as possible, but Kagoro stayed behind and eventually uncovered the entire truth. After saying all of this, Akiko continued to mock herself, as if she felt no guilt whatsoever, but Satoshi was the only one who realized that all of this was actually just an act. As Akiko was being taken away by the police, Satoshi shouted out that he would keep waiting for her until the day she was finally free.